Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Dear students, Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the course of language teaching methodologies. The topic of today's lecture is communicative language teaching method, and this very lecture is part 2 of a series of lectures on communicative language teaching method. I'm your teacher Muhammad Asif Khan, lecturer, Department of English, Kohat University of Science and Technology. Dear students, agenda for today's discussion is that first of all I will describe aims and objectives of communicative language teaching. After that we will discuss the syllabus of CLT, and it will be followed by the discussion on main features of communicative language teaching. We will also discuss the role of teacher and a learner in this method, and after that we will discuss the advantages and disadvantages of this method. In the end of this lecture, I will give you some of the common activities that are being used in CLT classes. So this is the agenda for today's discussion. Now let's move towards the aim of CLT method. Basically, it is a method that aims to make communicative competence the goal of language teaching. So the first aim behind this very method is to make communicative competence goal of language teaching. And the second thing is that they want to develop procedures for the teaching of the 4 language skills. And this very development of procedures actually acknowledges the interdependence of language and communication. So dear students, basically objectives in CLT courses and materials that are being used may be related either to very general language learning goals, or we can link these very things to those goals that are connected to the learners with very specific needs. So in the case of the general language learning goals, we see that objectives of CLT will reflect the type of syllabus framework that is used, whether the course is organized around the topic-based, function-based or skill-based syllabus. So it will define that what type of general language learning goals we are going to set in our class. The second thing is that in either cases, objectives will normally seek to operationalize the notion of communicative competence. The most important thing that will be focused in the goals and objectives of this method is communicative competence. And we see that in recent years, objectives for communicative courses are often linked to the learning outcomes. These very objectives are linked to the learning outcomes. In the case of courses developed for learners with more specific needs, objectives will be specific to the context of the teaching and learning. These needs may be in the domain of the 4 skills, and they may be concerned with listening, speaking, reading or writing. And each of this very skill can be approached from the communicative perspective. So these are the goals. Now let's move toward the syllabus, and we see that discussion of the nature of syllabus has been central in this method, and we see various versions have been proposed, like the notional functional syllabus. We have seen that one of the first and the most influential syllabus model that was described by Wilkins was the notional syllabus, which basically specified semantic / grammatical categories and we can connect these very semantic and grammatical categories with the exercises that are related to the frequency, motion, and location, and the category of communicative function that learners need to express. So these are the semantic and grammatical categories that were specified in the notional syllabus. So this very method was developed into a syllabus that included description of the objectives of the foreign language courses for the adults that belong to Europe, and this very syllabus includes the situations, the topics, the functions, and the notions. In situations, we see that they might typically need to use a foreign language. For example, when we go somewhere, or when we travel, or when we are on a business trip, these are the situations which are being included into these notional syllabus, and we see that they included the topics they might need to talk about, like personal identification, topics about the education and shopping. In the same way, they included the function-based activities in this very syllabus, and for completing these very functions they needed language. For example, when you are describing something, or when you are requesting for information or expressing agreement and disagreement, at these very functions you need language, and this very language was being taught in the notional functional syllabuses. In the same way, the notions made use in the communication are also included in these very courses, and we see that these notions describes the events that are used in communication, and that specifically focus on the time or frequency or the duration of something, and these very things were expressed in the notions. Along with these very things, this syllabus also included the activities based on vocabulary and grammar, but the main focus was on description of the situations, topics, functions, and notions. So this is the basic information about the central focus of the CLT, and we see that one of syllabus that was being developed in that very time was the notional functional syllabus. But we see that there have been numerous proposals and models for what a syllabus might look like in the CLT throughout the decade of 1980s, and these numerous proposals and models are like structures plus functions syllabus, or the functional spiral around a structural core, or we see syllabuses like structural, functional, and instrumental syllabuses, or purely functional or notional or interactional or task-based syllabus in the CLT in 1980s. So these are some of the types of the syllabuses being used in that very time. Now let's look at the main features of CLT method. One of the most important or distinctive feature of the communicative language teaching is that it pays systematic attention to the functional as well as structural aspect of the language. So this is the main or the key feature of communicative language teaching. This very notion of direct rather than delayed practice of communicative acts is also central to the most of CLT interactions. And this very practice of directly starting the communicative act is unlike SLT, because in CLT we see that communicative production is not postponed until the mastery of the forms or controlled sentence practices has occurred. We see in SLT they postpone this very thing, and initially they do activities in which they master the forms, and the student acquires control over the sentences. Another frequently cited dimension of CLT is that this very method is learner-centered, and it is based on experience, and this experience-based view of the second language teaching is one of the most common feature of CLT. Other features of CLT method are that learners learn a language through using it to communicate. The main feature of the communicative language is to use language to communicate. So authentic and meaningful communication should be the most important task, and for that reason we see that the goal of class activities is also the meaningful and authentic communication. One another thing that is focused in this very method is fluency, and it is the most important dimension of communication, and we see that sometimes accuracy is compromised in comparison with fluency. Another feature of this very method is that communication that is being used in this method involves the integration of different language skills. It is not just focused on the oral skill, or we are not saying that any one of the four skills is focused more than the other skills. All of the skills are given equal importance in this very method, and we see they are taught or learned through communication. To CLT practitioners, learning is a process of creative construction, and it involves trials and errors. So error is not seen here as something very faulty thing, because they include errors to be the important part of process of creative construction of the language or communication. Some other important features of CLT method are that it gives learners autonomy, and it provides greater choice to the learners over their own learning. And this very choice is being given both in terms of the content of the learning as well as the process that they might use to learn that language. So the use of small group is one of the example of this learner's autonomy, where we see that the autonomy of self-assessment is given to the learner, and in this way he has the choice over his learning process. And another feature of CLT method is that it has social nature of learning. Learning is not considered as individual's private activity, but it is considered as a social activity that depends upon the interaction with one another. So the movement known as cooperative language learning that reflects this viewpoint, as we see the socio-cultural language theory also reflects this very thing, and this very aspect of language learning is also cited in content and language integrated learning and task-based language teaching also. So these are some of the theories which are also based on the social nature of learning, and we see that here too in CLT, learning is not individual's private activity, but it is a social activity that is dependent upon interaction with other people. Now we move towards the curricular integration, and this very feature is that the connection between different standards of the curriculum is most of the time emphasized in CLT method, because English is not seen as something that is standing alone out of the other fields of the knowledge, but we see that it is linked to the other subjects in the curriculum. So actually language learning is integrated with the other subjects that are being taught in the class. So text-based instructions reflects this approach, and it tries to develop fluency in the text types that can be used across the curriculum. And one important thing about this curriculum integration is that project work in the English teaching also requires students to explore issues that are outside of the language classroom, and it is the most important feature of content and language integrated learning. So curriculum integration is one of the important feature of CLT method. Here, one another distinguished feature of CLT method is focus on the meaning. So meaning is viewed as the driving force of the learning, and content-based instruction and content and language integrated learning reflects this viewpoint, and it tries to make exploration of the meaning through content that is the core of language learning activities. Diversity is one of the key features of CLT method, and learners learn in different ways and they have different stance. So teaching needs to take these differences into account, and instead of trying to force students into a single formula or into a single mold or into a single type, it provides them to learn in different ways and have different stance. So in this very method, we see that in this type of language teaching, this has led to an emphasis on developing students' use and awareness of learning strategies. Another feature of CLT method is thinking skill, and the theorists of this method they say that language should provide a mean of developing a higher order thinking skill, and it is also known as the critical or creative thinking. So that is important purpose of the language, that language should serve as a mean of developing higher order of thinking skill. So in language teaching, this means that the students do not learn language for its own sake, but in order to develop and apply their thinking skills in situations that go beyond the language classroom. So they are not fixing them within the language classroom, but they make the students able to use their language with the critical and creative thinking. This method also provides alternative assessment procedures. We see that new forms of assessment that were needed here, they replace the traditional multiple choices and other items that test lower order skills. And here we see that multiple forms of assessments. For example, these very assessments include observations, interviews, or portfolios, and these very assessments can be used to build up a comprehensive picture of what students can do in the second language. So these new types of assessments replaced the traditional multiple choice and other assessments that test only the lower order of the skills. So here we have a very developed order of the skills, and they are being assessed by the teachers in a new way. So teachers of this very method, as we see that learners have autonomy, in the same way we see that teacher's role also changed, and he is a co-learner in this very method. So teacher is a facilitator, and who is always there to provide different alternatives, and in this way it is task-based learning through practice and learning through doing. So teacher is basically a facilitator, and in language teaching this has led to an interest in action research, and other forms of the classroom were also investigated in that very time, because there was a complete shift in the paradigm of the teaching, when a teacher just changed his main position and he moved from that central position where he was controlling all these things. Now he is a co-learner in the class. We will have a very brief look at the material that is being used in CLT, and we see there is a wide variety of material that is very much supportive to the communicative approaches to the language teaching. And we see that these very theorists of CLT, they observe and they viewed the material as a way of influencing the quality of classroom interaction and the language use. So material has a primary role, and a role of promoting communicative language use, and we consider four kind of materials that are presently used in CLT method, and we label these very materials as text-based materials, task-based materials, and realia-based materials, and technology-supported materials. So these are the four types of materials that are being used in communicative language teaching method. Now let's move towards two other important dimensions of language teaching, and we see that the role of teacher and role of the student or learner is very important. And here too we see that the role of teacher in CLT has changed. The type of classroom activities that are used or that are proposed in CLT, that demands new roles in the classroom for teachers. Now the teacher assumes the role of facilitator or a monitor, and instead of a model who was used for correct speech and for correct writing, here we see that there is a shift in the responsibility of the teacher, because before that it was the primary responsibility of the teacher to make sure that student produced plenty of error-free sentences. So the teacher had to develop a different view of learners' errors and of his or her own role in facilitating language learning. So he is not that much forceful in error correction, and he is just facilitating the activities of language learning. Here we see that Breen and Canlin described teacher's role, and they described the role in the following terms, that the teacher has two main roles. The first is to facilitate the communication process between all the participants in the class, and between these participants and the various activities and the tasks. So actually the role of teacher is to facilitate all these activities. The second role is to act as independent participant within the learning teaching group. He is the participant. First, he is the facilitator, and second role of the teacher is to be the participant of this very activity. And we see that the later role which I described to you is very closely related to the objectives of the first role, and it appears that it arises from it. So these roles imply a set of secondary roles for the teacher. The first very role is that he is organizer of resources, and he is himself a resource. Second, he guides procedures and activities. And the third very secondary role of the teacher is that he is a researcher and learner, because he is contributing in terms of appropriate knowledge and abilities, and in terms of actual and observed experience of the nature of learning and organizational capacity. These very things are being done by the teacher, because the role for the teacher is that of researcher and learner, and we see different contributions he do in this very classroom. Other roles that are assumed by the teacher are like as if he is an analyst, or he is a counselor, or he is a group process manager. So these are some of the roles of the teacher. Now let's move towards the role of learner. The emphasis in CLT is on the process of communication rather than mastery of the language forms. And this very central belief of CLT leads to the different role for the learners from those roles which were found in more of the traditional methods. The role of the learner is as negotiator between the self, the learning process, and the object of learning, that emerges from and interacts with the role of joint negotiator within the group and within the classroom procedures and activities which the group undertakes. So basically he is negotiator between all these activities. The implication for the learner is that he should contribute as much as he gains, and thereby learn in an interdependent way. It is not learning in isolation, it is basically learning in groups, and they are learning in interdependent way. So this is the role of CLT learner. Some other features of CLT learner is that he is the participant and he has to cooperate with his fellow students. So students had to become comfortable with listening to their peers in the group work or pair works, and instead of replying the teacher who served in the traditional methods as a model, here they are listening, or here they are talking with their peers, with their fellows, and for that reason they are comfortable in their activities. So they were expected to take on great degree of responsibility for their own learning, and because of that feel of responsibility, we see that most of the time there is a very quick learning in the students. In the pure form of CLT, we say that there is no text, and most of the time grammar rules are not presented, and the classroom arrangements are non-standard. These very things are defined by, or these very things are decided by teacher and students. So students are expected to interact primarily with each other instead of with the teachers, and we see lacking of the correction of errors, and this very feature is absent or infrequent, not done frequently. So these are the roles of the learner, and in pure method we observe that there is no text, and student and teachers have different roles. But in modified form, that aims to balance between fluency and accuracy, as we define in the characteristics, that sometimes we feel that CLT method does not have a balanced view about fluency and accuracy, and most of the time the balance is tilted toward fluency instead of accuracy. Here we see that modified forms do aim to balance fluency and accuracy, and the cooperative instead of individualistic approach to learning is stressed in modified form of CLT, and it may likewise be unfamiliar to learners, but we see that this modified form aim to balance between fluency and accuracy. CLT methodologists consequently recommended that learners learn to see that failed communication is a joint responsibility, and it is not the fault of the speaker or the listener. Similarly, successful communication is the accomplishment jointly achieved by the learner and speaker. So because of this joint responsibility, most of the time both the speaker and the listener, both of them put their effort to their best, and they try to accomplish jointly. So these are the roles of the teachers and learners. Now let's move towards the advantages and disadvantages of CLT method. One of the advantages of CLT method is that this technique increases the teacher-student relationship, and it is an interactive relationship. So CLT provides the opportunity for students that they get aware, or they become aware of their abilities, and most of the time they exhibit these very abilities in their communication. So in CLT, it is one of the advantage that it provides students opportunities to show their capabilities. Other advantage of CLT method is that the student in this way can learn the target language in an enjoyable way. The reason behind that is that this method greatly enhances the students' interest in learning language, and students will be more motivated by learning to communicate. Once they learn this very communication, they get more and more motivated every day. Another advantage of CLT method is that there is a very harmonious relationship, interactive relationship between teacher and student, and this very relationship is very different from the role of the teacher and student in the traditional educational methods, where we see that there is a kind of relation that is between master and servant. So here there is very interactive, harmonious relation between teacher and student, and it is not teacher-centered class as we see in the traditional classrooms of the English language. Those very classrooms were teacher-centered and knowledge-centered. And here we see that CLT method is learner-centered, and it is activity-centered, experience-centered. So the traditional methods were influenced by medieval scholastic teaching methods, and those very methods neglected the student abilities. Here we see that the student abilities are groomed, and they are made aware of their abilities, and they exhibit them in their communication and other activities. So the communicative teaching emphasizes the learner's cognitive abilities and operational capabilities. They focus on the knowledge of the language and the use of the language. This very thing allows the student to think about and express their views, and in this way they are trained in the real life, and they can develop their ability to use language to communicate. So these are the advantages. Now let's move towards the disadvantages of communicative language teaching, and we feel that the requirements of this very method are very difficult, and not all classroom can allow for group work activities, and most of the time we see that teaching aids and materials that are being used in CLT method are not available in classes. So it is controversial whether it can be used in every level of students, or we can use this very method for targeted or specific age group students. Another disadvantage of CLT method is that teacher should prepare the syllabus by taking students' interests and needs into account, and this very preparation of the syllabus by the teacher needs a lot of energy and lot of time of the teacher. But we see that with most of the teachers there is limited time, so it is not possible to develop a specific syllabus as this very system demands. So it is felt that there is not enough emphasis on the correction of pronunciation and grammar errors, and most of the time there is lacking in the students of CLT methodology, that they lack in the correction of pronunciation and in the right use of grammar. And it is because of this that there is focus on the meaning, and they often neglect the form of the language. One another disadvantage of CLT method is that this method focuses on fluency, and there is lack of interest about the accuracy in the grammar and pronunciation. CLT approach is great for intermediate students and advanced students, but as we discussed already, that for beginners some controlled practices are needed, and this very practice is not being done in CLT method. Monitoring ability is also required in the teacher. If he is having outstanding quality of monitoring his students, then it's okay. Otherwise, whole communicative language class will go in ruins. Grammar teaching practices that are used or followed in communicative language teaching are often very difficult, and it makes the application of this system very difficult. Another disadvantage of this method is that in the pure form of CLT there is no text, and often grammar rules are not presented to the student, and we are not having standard form classroom arrangements. So these things are often disturbing standard formal type of education. So in this method we see that students are expected to interact primarily with each other, and teacher's role is often reduced, and the role of these learners is expanded, and that results into the errors in the students. This very method is not effective in crowded classes, and it requires very competent teachers both in L1 and L2, and if the teacher is not knowledgeable, then student and teacher interaction will fail. This method also requires students and teachers that understand each other, and most of the time this very thing does not happen in the classes. So these are some of the advantages and disadvantages of this method. Now let's move towards the common activities that are used in this very method, and the first one is jigsaw activities. In these very activities the class is divided into groups, and each group has some part of information that is required to complete the activity, but the main requirement is that the class must fit the pieces together to complete the whole. And there we see that these groups are divided, but in the end we see this class stands united. Other activities in CLT are task completion activities. Puzzles are being given to the students, games and map reading activities are being given to the students, and in this way there are a number of other kinds of classroom tasks that are being given to the students, but the focus is on using one's language resources to complete the task. These games are being played or maps are completed with the help of the language resources. Another activity of CLT is information gathering activity. Student conducted surveys, interviews, and searches in which students are required to use their linguistic resources to collect information is being given to the students, and in this way they enhance their communication. Opinion sharing activities are also there in CLT, and these activities are those specific actions where students compare values, opinions, beliefs, such as a ranking task in which students list 6 qualities in order of importance when choosing something. So there they are sharing their own beliefs and opinions, and students compare their values. So in this opinion sharing activity, basically they are practicing their communication, not only their spoken communication but also their written communication. Information transferring activities are also being done in the CLT classes, and here we see that taking information that is presented in one form, and student has to represent it into a different form. For example, students may read instructions on how to get from point A to point B, and after that they have to sketch a map that shows the same sequence that has been provided into the instructions. Or they may read information about any subject, and then that very information is being represented in the form of the graph. After information transfer activity, we have another activity that is reasoning gap activities, and in this activity we see that deriving some new information from the given information through the process of inferences or practical reasoning is being done in the classroom. For example, working out teacher's timetable on the basis of the given class timetables is one of the activity where we see that student reasons, and in this reasoning they infer and they fill the gaps that are there in the activity. The last activity which we are going to discuss in today's lecture is role plays, and this very activity is very common in CLT classes. Students are assigned roles, and they improvise a scene, or exchange based activities are there on the given information or provided clues, and there we see that students in this very role plays exercise their communication. So this is the whole discussion about communicative language teaching method. So in this class we studied the aim and objectives of CLT. We also discussed the syllabus and main features of CLT, role of the teacher and the learner, advantages and disadvantages, and common activities that are being used in communicative language teaching class are also covered in this lecture. I hope that now you will be clear about this method. Thank you very much for listening passionately. Allah Hafiz.